All right, if you have your Bible, go ahead and open it towards the end, actually, to a book called Hebrews. You're like, wait a minute, Hebrews? I thought we were in Mark today. Oh, we are. But we're going to start off with Hebrews. We're going to fix our eyes on Jesus in chapter 12. The whole Bible is fixing our eyes on Jesus. Every story has been whispering his name. We're 27 weeks in now from starting at the beginning in Genesis, and we're walking through the very end in Revelation, and every piece of it is pointing to this man, Jesus. Hebrews 12 starts out like this. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And what it's talking about there is the whole previous chapter, chapter 11, where it's retraced the whole Old Testament and talked about character after character, men and women who followed God, who had faith in God. And so now it's referring to these people in kind of its Old Testament cliff notes as a great cloud of witnesses, right? And I think the picture is this heavenly crowd surrounding you and I, cheering us on as we're on the playing field of eternity right now for these years you have alive on earth. Wow, what a picture, right? Those who have gone before us in faith, rooting us on to run our race just like they ran their race. And so it says, throw off everything that hinders. Throw off every weight. Don't run this race with any type of race or weight or sin that clings so closely. Chuck it off as you're sprinting towards the goal. What's the goal? Fixing your eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, the one who began your faith and the one who will finish it, just like those Old Testament saints. See, that's why it calls them witnesses. What does a witness do? A witness tells the truth of a story. A witness points to something or someone else that is factual. See, we love in Hebrews 11 to go, this is the hall of faith right here. These are the spiritual heroes of our faith. These aren't the heroes, they're pointing to the hero. That's right. Every one of them shadows pointing ahead to Jesus. They didn't know his name, but they knew he was coming. And now we know his name. And therefore, since you're so surrounded by this crowd cheering you on, look to the one that they look to. Fix your eyes on Jesus. That's what we're doing right now. And we're going story by story through the Gospels, looking, staring, gazing at his character, attribute by attribute. And what are we seeing? His wisdom, his power, his compassion, his authority, his mercy and righteousness. And I think in the last few weeks, we're finding, I don't know if you've seen this, we're finding the very things that we need, the very things that we had in Eden. Are we not? Jesus teaching with authority, that's truth. Jesus caring for children and outcasts, that's love. Jesus curing sicknesses and diseases a few weeks ago, healing. These are the very core things that we need. Last week, right? Jesus, what? Removing sin, we found forgiveness. Jesus is systematically recovering Eden. That original place where God made everything good and we dwelled with him. Well, today's going to be another massive thing that you and I desperately long for. Jesus is going to deliver on. I want to ask you, when was the most carefree time of your life? Kind of think back on a season or a stretch in your life when it was just so carefree, right? No anxiety, no worries. And you can't answer like, well, 2 weeks old. Like, okay, we get it, right? Like infancy is that stretch, but that kind of defeats the point of my question. Maybe you think about being a kid. And like the biggest problem that you faced was like finding a big enough sack to hold all your Halloween candy, right? Or how do you stay on the couch when the floor is lava? These are the things that tormented you. The biggest problem walking down the sidewalk, don't step on the crack, right? I might actually break mom's back. These are the things that we faced with when life was so difficult because we had 7 hours a day of playtime. Oh, why don't I get 9, right? Maybe your mind goes to being a young adult, kind of a stretch in season of your life where maybe your biggest stress was what to wear on a first date or how do I get up for that 11 a.m. class? Oh, tough life. Midnight, I remember running out of tubs of cheese balls. Those were hard days. Certainly, as life progresses, so does life's complexity, so does life's responsibilities, the demands, the weight, and yes, the stress. I know I never used to consider myself someone with anxiety. I was pretty carefree, and I think I could handle hard things with ease for a long time. But over time, that began to change. And so to commemorate this before and after of the last decade, I made a meme. Here's my meme that I've crafted for you guys. Can't really see it. Can we turn off the lights for just a moment in the front? That'd be possible. Nick, you're right there. Dustin's on it. Thank you, Dustin. I want you to feel the full effect. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. Man. I resonate with Frodo a lot. What happened? What happened over the last decade? Well, Tyler, you planted a church. Hello? Well, yes. You had kids. Hello? Yes. Yes, that's why this right here is happening. But I think to some extent, all of us in this room, we get it, right? Increasing complexities and responsibilities. I have now other humans to take care of and to feed. I have a job with responsibilities that I have to take care of to keep food on the table, right? More and more, there is more to maintain, a house to maintain, friendships to maintain, a body to maintain, and with it, more and more cares, more and more stress, more and more hurt and pain and wounds, damage. And as opportunities to be weary and worn down increase, so does our opportunities to worry. I think in my life, I began to see the temperature of the pot kept increasing, and as it did, bubbles of anxiety began to boil up, right? To where my verse for the year one year became Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your heart. What a verse. That verse for the year has just stayed the verse for the year, like year after year, if you know what I'm saying. Because to be honest, I'm still fighting in many ways for that peace to fully rule in my heart. Maybe I'm not alone this morning in this room. I don't think I am. In fact, I think for the good of everyone else in this room, and even for the good of acknowledging your own soul, I'd actually love to ask you to raise your hand right now if, in any kind of capacity, anxiety has marked your life. Okay. Yeah, you couldn't see, but it's a lot of people, right? I think that's super helpful if you're in this room, because one of the lies of the enemy is that you're alone. And you're the crazy, you're the weird one who can't handle the stress and difficulties of life. But this is a universal human response to present and future trouble. We see it in the Bible all over the place, and we certainly see it today. The New York Times said this: anxiety affects an estimated 40 million adults, which is 20% of the U.S., and that figure doesn't even account for the far greater swath who are garden variety warriors, people who fret when a child is late, they worry when they hear a siren headed towards home, or they're sure their phone call in the middle of the night means someone is gone. The tenuousness of modern life can make anyone feel overwrought, and in societal moments like the one we are in, with all its political discord and global unrest, our futures are threatened by everything from diminishing retirement funds to global warming to brain tumors. It often feels as if ours is the age of anxiety. Y'all, that was written pre-pandemic. Here we are 2 years later. A new study came out 2 months ago. A global meta-study comprised of 48 mini-studies showed that 20% figure is now 45.6%. That's what the last 2 years have added on to compound this. Depression in 2 years has quadrupled from 8.7% to 33%. This is what people are calling, and many predicted it would happen, an echo pandemic of depression and fear and anxiety and panic and stress that's occurring. And it makes sense, right? We see that in GC. We see that in our counseling ministry. And I think if you're in this room and you're going, man, that's not me, kind of like I was for so long. Oftentimes the stigma on those who struggle with anxiety is like, man, they're constantly overwhelmed, they're frazzled, they're outwardly panicking. But that's not always the case. A lot of times it's much more inward. In fact, some of those who wrestle the most with anxiety appear to have it all together on the outside. But inwardly, it is tumultuous, and they are trying to control every variable in life. Maybe that's you. Yeah, anxiety doesn't know personality boundaries. It doesn't know zip code boundaries or skin color boundaries or voting line boundaries. There's so much to fear on the front end, so much to control on the back end, and in the middle is what? Is anxiety. There's a lot to worry about. Maybe these are some of the things you're worrying about today. Sleep, right? Bills, GPAs, house repairs, family conflict and drama. Am I going to get married ever? Is my marriage going to be healthy ever? Will I get remarried ever, right? When I graduate, will there actually be a job? Is my industry going to be hiring? I mean, think about all the things that you and I ask about all the day. And then add like the last year, right? Am I doing this right? Should I be masking? Should I be not? Should I get a vaccine? Should I not? Should I stay away from them? Should I not? There's so many questions that you have just been bombarded with, so many opportunities for you and I to question, to worry. Am I going to lose someone I love? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my mind? We're getting slammed with a storm of stress. It's a barrage of what ifs. I've noticed that nothing in this world is ever going to take you away from stress. The current is always towards more and more and more stress, right? So to get out of that, you have to push against it. You're never floated into being carefree. Dr. Charles Mayo Clinic, said this: worry affects the circulation, the heart, the glands, and the whole nervous system. I've never met a man or known a man to die of overwork, but I've known a lot that have died of worry. Literally, anxiety is killing us. It's the silent assassin of our day, and sometimes in the church it's worse because we don't talk about it. Because you and I put on our spiritual cape of faith that we flap in the wind and act like everything's good, when in reality we're getting bombarded on the inside. I just wonder if many of you are like me for many years, and still today to some extent, that there's a gap between the theology of what we're talking about on Sunday and the confidence and the joy and the celebration that we walk out of here with, and the street level fear, anxiety, and worry that you deal with Monday through Saturday. How do we get out of that? Right? It's a long intro, Tyler. It is a long intro. Because almost every one of your hands went up. How do we get out of that? Well, the world's going to give you a lot of ways, a lot of blogs, a lot of books, a lot of podcasts out there, and they're almost all built on what? How to cope. I don't want to cope. I want to cure. How do we combat this fear and anxiety? And the answer is not just information, okay? There's a lot of good teaching in the scripture. It's going to have a lot to say about this subject, and there's a lot of really necessary and freeing instruction. But today, I don't want us to look and dissect instruction. We need something more than just teaching. I want us to see the teacher. I want us to fix our eyes on Jesus today. The answer to our anxiety is found in fixing our eyes on the Prince of Peace. Amen. So let's do that in Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4, verse 35. On that day, it had been a long day, we'll get into that in a minute. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, let's go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with them. Okay, there's been a lot happening this day, and now Jesus is kind of leaving the crowd, and we get a more intimate setting on a boat, just Jesus and his 12. This passage isn't going to be about a confrontation with the Pharisees like last week. It's not about a crowd. Jesus is not going to be piping in his satellite sermon today. No. He's pulling his disciples aside for a private, personal lesson. And as he does, Jesus, did you notice he's initiating the event? Let's go to the other side. Jesus is the one who's taking the reins and says, let's hop in the boat, guys. Now, why is this important? Well, let me ask you this. Do you think Jesus knows what's coming? Yes. That's the right answer. Yes, right? The omniscient one, Jesus, absolutely knows what's about to go down on the lake. Okay? And yet he still says, let's go. He is taking them into the storm. Wait, Jesus takes us into storms? Yes. The Bible says yes. He could have chosen not to go, right? He could have chosen to delay. Let's go later. Let's go earlier. But Jesus knows right when to go. It's not an accident, and it won't catch Jesus off guard. The disciples have no clue what's about to hit them, but Jesus absolutely does. It's very intentional. And I want you guys to see the picture of this level of control in Jesus today. Like he's seeing everything. He sees the whole chessboard and chess game of your life, right? Like moves and moves and moves ahead, orchestrating events out for your deep joy and good and his glory in your life. Everything that comes at you is planned and purposeful. Nothing is random and reactive. And so when we're blindsided, a lot of us, we go, well, what's happening, God? What are you doing? What's going on here? But y'all, Jesus doesn't stumble into storms. So, verse 37, let's look. He takes us into the storm. What else does he do? And a great windstorm arose, a concept everyone in this room is familiar with. Right? Like 4 days a week, that sentence is true in Oklahoma, okay? I mean, come on. Where else in the world do you get, blizzard, tornado, and earthquake, like all in the same week? Like most people don't see that in their life. We're like, that was last week for us, right? I think recently I think I saw a few years back that our city is the 7th most dangerous place in the world to live. Right behind the South Pole and the African Lake of Death. Yeah. All right. Feeling encouraged. This is why Lauren was so happy that we moved here, right? Wow. It's the second most unpredictable weather city in the U.S. And what am I saying in all this? Well, what I'm trying to say is we understand storms, all right? Like literally where you're sitting right now was where the last F5 that hit our country passed, right? Okay, we get it, all right? We understand storms, okay. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. You live through Oklahoma. Some of you guys are transplants, right? I already talked to some of you from other states. Like, you live here one spring, and you get an honorary meteorology degree. Okay? Where's Kurt? Kurt's already making it on the news. We got our own weatherman right here, backyard weatherman. Hey, thank you for keeping us forewarned. Appreciate that. If you don't follow him, you should follow him. So, our point, how bad could this be? It's a lake. It's wind coming on the lake. Well, in the Sea of Galilee, a couple things real quick. Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level. There's a lot of cliffs and mountains, especially on the south and east of the sea. If you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. 2,000 feet above the surface. So downdrafts, this is the language you guys understand, come down off these peaks and create a kind of tunnel of wind on the lake and can whip up waves very quickly, okay? If you know things like gate-to-gate couplet, language like that we're all familiar with, like that's kind of the swirling, spinning. In fact, the Greek word windstorm here, it's a very heightened word. It means like a furious gale of wind, okay? This isn't something tiny or small here. We're talking 6 to 7 feet waves are crashing into a little fishing boat. That's pretty severe. And it's filling with water, and it's tossing and shaking them. Look, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so the boat was already filling. Like, we can't minimize this and be like, no big deal. It was a big deal. This is a legitimate threat to their life right now. We can't say, well, you just shouldn't be afraid of that. You just shouldn't be anxious about that. It's no big deal. It's serious, and it's dangerous. Which is why they're freaking out, all right? Now, where's Jesus in the middle of all this chaos? Verse 38. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. What? Are you serious? Like, what kind of coma level of sleep is that? And how do I get that? All right? How does my baby get that? I mean, for some of you moms out there, right? Like, how do we bottle that up? Because that is incredible. Well, we already said it was a long day. Jesus had been ministering all day long, teaching to the crowds, healing people. And I think it's really important we see right now in this moment the humanity of Jesus. He's exhausted. He's exhausted. Like, I don't know what your picture of Jesus is. Maybe you think he just like floated on clouds from place to place and just avoided every type of hardship and strain and difficulty while he entered into a human body, but he didn't. He submitted to the very limitations and frailty of a human body, and he needed sleep. The God who doesn't sleep was asleep. How crazy is that? But he's also showing us something else not just his exhaustion. Jesus is painting for us a picture right now in this moment of what's going on the inside. He's sonogramming his soul for us to see. While the outside is crazy, he on the inside is still. He's not pacing with anxiety. He's not panicking. He's not rattled, and he's not on edge. The Prince of Peace is unfazed by our storms, y'all. Jesus takes us into storms, but Jesus is also unfazed by our storms. Remember, again, if all this is on purpose, then so too was him being asleep. Interesting, right? And if you start to ask the question, why, Jesus, am I going through this storm? And there's a lot of great biblical answers. I think of James 1. I think of Romans 8, right? I think of 2 Corinthians 1, 8, 9. We'll get there in a minute. Romans 5, 3 through 5. Deuteronomy 8, 1 through 3. All these passages are helping us understand that when we walk through storms, there's an element of formation. God is, in a sense, testing us. He's going to help us see what's on the inside of our own lives as he is grooming and growing and strengthening us as our good Father. In other words, he wanted to see how the disciples would handle it. Well, let's see how they handle it. Verse 38, keep going. And they woke him, and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Oh, man. In the Greek, the mood here is extremely urgent. It's high emotion, like they're crying out. If I could just translate it into English, you'd be like, "Ah!" Right? Like they're grabbing Jesus, okay? And I think we have an actual picture of their response. This is a modern day kind of reconstruction of the disciples, if you could see that. Like that's what they're doing right there, right? Kevin McAllister style. They're freaking out. What is going on, Jesus? They're grabbing him. I imagine there's a lot that's being said, but I think it's interesting to notice, like, we all too often do what? We mirror our circumstances. It's crazy on the outside, and then we absorb that craziness on the inside, and we match the level, right? That's what we do so often. Now, here's what's crazy. You've got to remember, these are experienced fishermen. This is not me on that boat. These guys grew up on this lake. Many of them fishing with dad from the time they were a toddler. They know what they're doing. I think this is an interesting thing about fear, that oftentimes it riddles us most in the areas of life that we're very comfortable in, that are our sweet spots. That we think, because we're so familiar with this, that we know how to do this. And so what? We're not trusting God, we're trusting us. Yeah. That's what's going on here. And in the middle of all these screams, they're asking Jesus to save them. I think one of the things that Mark makes clear is this. Hey, ask a really, really revealing question. Don't you care? Did you catch that? Like, they're not just asking Jesus for help, they're questioning his love, y'all. Where are you? Have you forgotten us? Jesus, what are you doing right now? We're about to die. Don't you care? You ever asked the Lord that? Kind of relate to that? Where are you, God? Step in. How could this be for my good? Wake up. Do something. Verse 39, Jesus does. He awoke. And he rebuked the wind, the cause, and the waves, the effect. And he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Wow. Just a word. Literally his breath, syllables coming out of his mouth. And he stills a storm. Peace. Look at what he says. Peace. Like, the word here is like hush, shh. Like you quiet a crying baby. Shh. And the second word, be still, phomao in the Greek, it's literally to muzzle. You can't talk anymore. In a few weeks, we're going to see Jesus say that exact same word to demons. See, anything that terrifies us, anything that runs counter to the Lord, Jesus is able to silence with a word. phomao. And in an instant, it is, right? Look. And a great calm. Oh, I love that word. A great calm, a mega in the Greek, mega calm came over the sea as the wind ceased. Jesus tames that which terrifies us. So Jesus leads us into the storms. He's unfazed by our storms. Why? Because he can, number 3, silence storms. He has the authority. We've seen it every week, right? Authority over all these categories. Authority over the law. Authority over sickness. Authority over sin. Now we're seeing what? Authority over creation. And then he turns to the disciples after showing them that he cares for them by removing the threat. And he says, this is a really penetrating question. It's a double-sided question. He said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Like, ouch, right? Can we just sit in that moment? I think you and I, if you wrestle at all with anxiety, you need to hear that question from the Lord graciously sent your way. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? He's not condemning you. He's not beating you down. But he is drawing you out to expose what's really going on the inside. Jesus is diagnosing the problem here, and he's saying, your fear is coming from a lack of faith. He's connecting these two, fear and faith, and he's saying they're diametrically opposed. You either walk in fear or you walk in faith. But you can't do both. Well, wasn't it okay for them to wake Jesus, Tyler? Well, of course it was. Yeah. Wasn't it okay for them to pray? I mean, they called on Jesus for help. That's what we should do, right? Yes, the problem was not that. It's that they weren't trusting him in the process. Yeah. Look again at verse 35. This is really, really interesting at the very beginning. What had Jesus already said? Let's go across to the other side. Y'all, Jesus already told them he was going to get them to the other side. Before the storm ever came, Jesus already saw through the storm to the other shore. And he told them, we're going to the other side, boys. But in the middle, what? They forgot. They lost sight of the character of Jesus. Do you still lack faith? Haven't I shown you enough that I am trustworthy? Has my authority not been proven over and over and over enough? I told you I'm getting you to the other side. The answer you see to our anxiety, are you seeing it more and more? It's not just more information, right? It's not just knowing more, it's knowing Jesus. We need to see him. That's what changes us. Look at verse 41 then. How do they respond to that? And they were filled with great fear. Whether they just were filled with great fear. It's actually a different word in the Greek than the verse before it. The verse before it was a cowardice, timidity. This is a reverent awe. Okay? There's an exchange occurring inside the disciples. A shift in focus from the storm to the calmer. As they fix their eyes off of the danger and onto the deliverer. I think it's interesting. We always fear something. It's not a question of do you fear. It's who are you fearing? What are you fearing? Where is your awe and reverence and respect going? Is it to the land of what ifs or the storms that are barraging you right now? Or is it to the one who controls them? Where's that directed? And then they ask the question that we're all asking, the most fundamental question of humanity. Who then is this? Who is this man? Who is Jesus that even the wind and the sea obey him? Right question, disciples. Who's this guy? Because he ain't just a good teacher. And he's not, at this point, just a good example for us to learn how to better love our neighbors as ourselves. He's something more than that. Because the one who has authority over creation is what? Creator. This ain't just another man. In this moment, the disciples are helping us see the authority of Jesus. So what do we do with this today? Well, we've already talked about the fact that you and I have a lot that are raging around us, a lot to worry about. Storms are bombarding us and assaulting us. They're unrelenting, but are legitimate, just like this storm was. They're actual threats. Sometimes they're irrational and not, but many times they are. And so I think a couple questions we need to ask ourselves as we kind of feel the surge of anxiety. Number one, do I trust God's control right now over the storm? This is about God's sovereignty. Do I trust his control over the storm? Like we've already just seen today that Jesus has full control. Like he can whip the storm with a word, right? And not only that, we saw him lead the venture in the first place. He took them into it. So there's no accidents, there's no miscalculations with God, which is absolutely critical for you and I to get, right? Because if God's not in control, then we have every reason to be fearful and be filled with anxiety. If God's constantly playing defense, then but he's not. Now, I think the higher pain point question for most of us in the room is not, do I trust God's control over the storm? It's the second one. Do I trust God's care in the storm? Just like the disciples. Don't you care? Right? Are you with me? Do you love me? Is this for my good? Why would you allow this? Why would you take me into this? Why haven't you stopped this? Those are the questions we're asking. And then in the middle of that, I think the answer is, where is God? He's right there in the boat. I'm right here. How is this for my good? Well, like Job, you probably won't get the full reason, honestly. If I can just shoot straight with you, you won't get every specific answer in that question knocked out. Now, you will get some traces of that, and you will get some good, solid, foundational, biblical answers to that, which is usually one of two things. He's going to reveal himself to you either as the silencer of that storm or the sustainer through that storm. That's what he's doing. He wants to show you more of him. Forget if the storm gets stilled. He wants your soul to be stilled. That's what Jesus is after. Well, what happens if he doesn't still the storm, Tyler? Like the way you've been preaching so far, it's like Jesus calms every storm. I'm going to confront, face all these things in my life, but that's okay. Jesus is going to flatten them all the time. No. What happens when he doesn't still the storm? Well, let me just tell you real quick. He didn't still this storm immediately, did he? Well, yeah, he did. I mean, he got up and in a word, he stilled it. Yeah, but he didn't still it at the 1 foot wave level, did he? Or at 2 foot? At the 3 and 4 foot wave level where it really started to get dicey? He just let it keep escalating. There he was, sleeping. He didn't wake up at that level and stop it. He let it keep going. Well, hold up. What are you saying, Tyler? I'm saying he could have stopped it sooner, but he didn't. I'm saying that God, catch this, does allow us to face circumstances that are beyond what we can handle. I thought God doesn't allow me to face something. He doesn't give me something more than I can handle. When it comes to sin, that's true. God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when it comes to life and hardship and difficulty and circumstances that are absolutely chaotic, he will let you be confronted with something that is more than you can handle. 2 Corinthians 1, 8 and 9. Let's read this. For we don't want you to be ignorant, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. This is Paul talking, which, by the way, that affliction involved an actual shipwreck, by the way, where he was like night on the open sea, he talks about. Okay, so storm didn't stop there. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Are you hearing Paul? I was at the point, he says, just end it, Lord. I'm ready to go be with you. Verse 9, indeed we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He didn't still the storm for Paul. And he was doing it to drive Paul more and more and more to depend on him. He did the same with the disciples. Yeah, he stilled this storm, but guess what? The disciples would face many other storms in their life. Every one of them would face a brutal death except John, who was tried to, he was put in a boiling pot of oil, okay? So they tried to kill him, but he somehow miraculously survived that. Every one of them, storm after storm after storm, would face them in the coming days, and Jesus wouldn't remove all of them. And if you still need more clarity, if you still need more help, then I want you to look no further than what? The storm of the cross. Jesus didn't still that one. Could he? Yeah, he could have. In the garden where he prayed to the Father, if you would be willing to take this cup, please let it pass. But nonetheless, not my will, but yours. And he set his face towards the cross, and he willingly went over and under the waters of death so that you and I wouldn't have to. In the middle of your storm, if Jesus isn't stilling it, you need to fix your eyes on the cross. In fact, this whole story is a parallel in many ways of the cross and the resurrection, where Jesus, after a long day of ministry, his 3-year period of ministry, went into the boat and laid down and fell asleep. He died. And as he died, guess what the disciples did? They freaked out as the storm of their chaos was raging around. But what happened 3 days later? Jesus woke. And he stilled the chaos, and he asserted his authority and victory over sin and death in the resurrection in an empty tomb. What we're seeing here is not just a fun story, it's a picture of the gospel. That Jesus has stilled the greatest storm that you and I have ever faced, the storm of our own sin and death. And in a word, he silenced it. It is finished. Shh. He addressed our deepest anxieties. And one day he's returning, y'all, and we'll see him face to face. And every bit of anxiety, fear that grips us this side of heaven will vanish as he ushers us into the new heavens and new earth with him. That's where this is headed. So, what do we do in the meantime, Tyler? Well, we run to the one who's in the boat. As the band comes up, I want us to look at Philippians 4, 6, and 7. We run to the one who's in the boat. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Don't be anxious about anything, but everything you are anxious about, talk to God about it. And as you do, the peace of God, the Prince of Peace, will unleash his transcendent, his superseding, his surpassing peace to guard your heart and mind and to rule inside of you. That's what you're to do in the meantime, to call on him, to calm the winds and the waves. And if he does, praise his name. And if he doesn't, praise his name, because he's going to calm your soul instead. Doesn't mean life's not scary, right? It just means the captain's in our boat, which is why Colossians 3:15 can be true. And why it says let the peace of Christ rule in your heart. It doesn't say you have to earn the peace of Christ. It doesn't say you have to win over the peace of Christ. It doesn't say you have to go out of here today and do all this to try to achieve the peace of Christ for you. It's already been purchased for you. Now all you have to do is yield to it and allow it to invade your heart. Let it rule. Let it reign. That's the word of kingship. And kings win, okay? Kings win. When the anxiety and storms of your life collide with the Prince of Peace, guess who wins? He wins. He rules in your hearts. So I'm just going to tell you a story of a family from 150 years ago. You may know the story. A guy named Horatio Spafford. Him and his wife Anna had 5 children, and life was going well for them in Chicago. He was a successful businessman and lawyer, and until in 1871, tragedy struck their family, and their son suddenly died of pneumonia. The same year, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed virtually every investment they had. They lost everything. And in the aftermath of that wreckage, trying to rebuild their life, a couple years later, Horatio knew that their family needed some much-needed reprieve, and so they were going to travel to Europe to see family and try to rebuild their life. And so as they're headed there, a major business problem came up, and Horatio had to stay home and attend to it, or they were going to lose more. And so he sent his wife and kids on ahead of them on a ship. 4 days into that voyage, that ship collided with a Scottish iron vessel. And immediately, everyone knew on board something was bad. 12 minutes later, the ship went under. And as Anna and her children prayed on the surface of that ship, they just submitted to the will of God. Anna recounts those prayers, and sadly, all 4 of her children perished that day. She somehow survived as she clung to some wreckage of the ship. 9 days later, made it to Europe, sent a wired telegram back to Horatio and just said, spared alone. Horatio immediately got on a ship and headed to Wales to meet her, to join his grieving wife. And about, 4 days into the voyage, the captain of the ship says, it's right here. That's where it went down. And Horatio knelt and began to write music, poured out of him. And these are the words that poured out of him at that exact spot. When peace like a river attends my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, you've taught me to say, it is well with my soul. The God of peace wants to give you more than just stilling your circumstances. He wants to change not what's on the outside, but what's on the inside. And so church, let's just, as we begin to worship, let's ask ourselves, let's probe, Lord, help me see where there's anxiety in my life. And as you do, would you help me see where there's fear and where there's a lack of faith in you? And then church, let's start casting our gaze off the storm and onto him. Let's actively do that as we're worshiping and singing to him today. Amen. The one who's in control and the one who cares, that we would have fresh vision of him today. There's not a mechanical system to get you out of your anxiety. As good as counseling is and as good as GC is, and sometimes as helpful as medication can even be, the antidote to our anxiety today, the foundational answer is to simply see Jesus. Let's fix our eyes on him right now. Would you pray with me? Well, Jesus, we thank you. You are the one who's totally in control, and we need a fresh vision of that. God, we are bombarded every day, and we just confess that we are sometimes faced with things that are beyond what we can handle. We can't control it. We can't keep it all together. There are things that are overwhelming and threatening and difficult and wearisome. We have legitimate worries and cares, but right now, Father, help us to cast those on you. Would you begin to do a great work in our hearts to shift the focus off of the storm and off of our inabilities and onto you, Jesus. Your total control, your total care. We thank you that you're able to still the storms, but we thank you more than that. You're able to still our souls. And we thank you that we can cry out just like Horatio. My sin, oh, the thought, right? Oh, the thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, has been nailed to the cross. So we want to praise you for that most of all right now. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.